All right, here we are. Let's have a look at the basics, the first step of really where you should probably take your trading strategy bit by bit. So, regardless of how advanced you get when it comes to trading, the fundamentals still apply: support, resistance, supply, demand, diagonals, the basic stuff. I guess the example that Ads and I use is like baking a cake. You can't have a layer, beautiful rainbow layer cake without all the pieces sort of working together. And that's exactly what starting with horizontal lines of support and resistance are. So you would have read the guide by now. You understand what horizontal support and resistance are. And I think a lot of people like using horizontal levels because they're easy to sort of attach to key turning points in the market. They have pretty specific price points, and they help you with spotting support resistance flips where an area goes from a level of resistance. We break above it, we turn to support before a continued run to the upside, or indeed the opposite with a resistance support flip or support resistance flip. So let's have a look now, Ads. How would we draw our horizontals on our daily time frame? Now, for you, when we do this as well, you can start with the weekly, and you can look for very specific or high level or high targeted levels of support and resistance. So if you start on your weekly, it helps you go back further in time for where levels may have been respected in the past that might be respected again in the future. And then you can build your way down: weekly, daily, 12-hour, 4-hour, 1 hour. And you can see there, if we were simply just working on the daily time frame, we wouldn't have seen these significant support or resistance levels dating all the way back to 2018. So starting on the weekly, we're going to draw in our levels of resistance, Ads.
Yep, absolutely. Start off with the horizontal ray tool on the left-hand side here, and then we can just place our support and resistance levels. So we're looking for areas that have multiple touches, I guess, in the past to really signify where our levels should be. So obviously where we're sitting now, we'll have a look at this level here. All right, so we've got multiple touches along this line here, Ty, and now we're butting up against this level right now. If we're looking for some zones or some levels in the future as resistance, it's a little bit harder to gather from this chart, but we'll make it work. You could probably have a look at this level here, and of course this level here, Ty, for
And
our
that's
resistance. Sorry, excuse me, go for it.
Yeah, and that's perfect. I think when you're on the weekly, you want to look for the highest quality levels of resistance or support. So you might only have one or two sort of levels, and the cleanest, sort of most high quality ones. Now, a way of eliminating a little bit of noise, especially if you start getting down to the 1 hour or the 4 hour time frames, Ads. If we go to the top of the screen there, we can go to what's called a line chart. And you can see there how it eliminates all the noise, because for you, you might choose to use wicks, you might choose to use candle bodies, or you might like to choose a combination of the two. Personally, for myself, I like to use a combination of connecting wicks and bodies. Or if I really want to eliminate the noise, I would choose the line chart and specifically just look for these peaks or these valleys or these V tops or M sort of tops for connecting my lines of horizontal support. Now, if we go back to our candle chart, Ads.
Absolutely, there you go.
And we're going to talk about very quickly what's called a support resistance or resistance support flip. So we can see a couple of pretty identifiable zones there. One is just at the peak at June there in 2019, where we had levels of resistance.
Yep.
And we can also see the resistance back in September 2018 as well. If we move that down just a fraction, Adds to the bodies, the candle bodies of the top of that movement. Yep, right there. Perfect. So you can see how in the past, going back to August in 2018, we broke below this level after a pretty significant drop down. We had what was the sort of the first touch of resistance. We rallied down. We came back up in June 2019, and we had another level of resistance. Back where Ads has his pointer there was very close to being another level of resistance. And you can see now just in 2020 that we've hit it. and then we've the secondary weekly candle has what's become support for that level. So that's a resistance support flip where price has headbutted that resistance time and time again. We finally break through it, and then we retest it, and then it becomes a level of support, a high quality level of support at that. Now, one thing to remember too is that the more touches we get on a trend line, the first 2 to 3 touches establishes the resistance or the support, and then it's not always going to play out exactly as we would like it. But after that sort of third, fourth time, the more times it gets touched, the weaker that level of support or resistance becomes. So we've got to be mindful of the more we headbutt resistance or tag support, that those zones could eventually become weaker and price action could break through. So what we probably want to look at now is going down a little bit further to the daily time frame, where there's obviously going to be a little bit more noise, more candles to look at, and we can start to identify, probably for myself, is what is my most traded levels, mostly on the daily time frame for ads and I as a swing trader ad. So are there any other levels of support that we can identify looking back as well, not just resistance levels?
Absolutely, there is some support we can definitely look for. So if we just we can obviously use this support resistance, or this resistance support flip that we got here on, what was it, the 28th of July, in which we retested that zone. So that's quite nice. But there's also a number of levels that we can see moving across the chart, where we can see some confluence around this $215 mark as well, Ty, where we had multiple touches along here. We had that resistance support resistance flip where we break through, come back down here, retest that level, and continue to the upside. So this is definitely a level of support that we can find here on the chart now, moving on into the future price action.
Totally. And even if we go further down now as well, to something like a 4, to even further support levels or resistance levels. And then again on the 4 hour, it's the same thing. On the 4 hour or the 1 hour, you would probably use, or I guess in my experience, what I would do is I use the 4 hour time frames to map out levels where we might find more immediate sort of trading ranges. So if I'm not holding a trade for weeks and weeks, and particularly in crypto, you would maybe use a weekly support resistance strategy, maybe in something like Forex, or if you're holding stocks where you're looking for really high trading ranges or very wide trading ranges. But for myself on the 4 hour, I'm really just using it to map out the market between the higher time frame levels of support and resistance ads.
Absolutely. So if we're identifying some of these levels here on the 4 hour, the immediate time frame, or the micro time frames, as we do call it throughout the Discord, we can obviously find a level here where we bounced off this support multiple times in the past, and then finally, as Ty described it, the more you headbutt up against a resistance, for example, the weaker it gets. And sure enough, we did smash straight through it with quite a bit of strength there, Ty, coming through on that move.
Totally. And what Ads just said there, talking about strength, when you can see that we have 1, 2, 3, 4 touches on this trend line, and then on the 5th time we have a very strong bullish engulfing candle, we have a very strong amount of buyers, a large amount of buyers. It's busted straight through that resistance, and then we've headed back up towards that next level of resistance, making a pretty sizable gap, or a pretty sizable trading range there. So what you might like to do is maybe you might want to color your weekly support and resistance levels in maybe red or green, and your 4 hour levels of support and resistance in white or another color. And that way, as price approaches those major levels on, i.e. your daily or weekly time frames, that we're approaching significant or high quality levels of support and demand, where you might look to potentially look at making buys or making sells. Now, one thing that I think is really important to look at as well, and we're going to get into indicators a whole bunch in the rest of this series, and you can see on our screen there, we've got our custom steamroller indicator, and we've got what's called our RSI indicator, which is the relative strength index. Now, if we go to the daily time frame, probably more so. Actually, no, you know what, Ads? Let's go back to where we were. I apologize. Let's stick where we were on the 4 hour. Now we can see where we've drawn in this first resistance or this resistance point on the 1st of June 2020.
Yep.
And then we've had a touch on about the 23rd of June as well, which was our third touch. Yeah, 23rd of June, where we wicked up there. Now, one way to look at confluence, and confluence means more information telling you the same thing. We're looking for all the pieces of the puzzle to join up to start building that narrative of whether we are pulling back or whether we might break through this zone. So looking where ADS has circled that area of resistance there, we can see on not only our custom steamroller indicator, but also on RSI that we are approaching the top of a move. So it's important not just to rely on support or resistance, but also to use other tools that give you indications of saying, hey, this is a level where we need to be paying attention to. We need to either exit our longs or potentially look at short. So it's important to look at other indicators and other levels of confluence to help you gauge whether we are going to reject at that level or whether we are going to continue through it. So we've spoken about levels of support. We've spoken about levels of resistance. We've spoken about flips or support resistance flips. So some of the things that make a good level that we will just highlight again is the number of touches. So the more touches, it becomes a significant level. We use 2 to 3 touches to confirm a trend. And then anything beyond that sort of 4th touch or 3rd touch, I'm starting to look, hey, this is starting to weaken now. It becomes someone that I need to pay attention to, particularly on the 4 hour. When it comes to the daily and the 1 day, the 1 week, we want to make sure that we're assessing whether they're high quality zones or not. And we also want to assess too, how is the reaction on that 4th or 5th touch? Do we have a big bullish engulfing candle like what we saw on the 24th, 25th of July, where we busted straight through that resistance, or are we getting weak little amounts of volume that aren't going to tell us that we're headed through?
Yeah.
So also as well, we got to keep in mind too that the levels that we draw for support and resistance are not always going to be bang on. They're not going to always have 4 or 5 touches that are perfect. We might get little wicks that break through and then break back down, like fake outs. Where the market makers are trying to make you jump on a trend thinking that you've broken resistance or broken support and that everybody jumps on and then the market reverses and goes back the other way. So one thing that you might want to do when it comes to levels of support and resistance is wait for the next candle to close if you're trading on a 1 hour or a 4 hour. Don't immediately jump on when you see a support or resistance level being broken, because it could always break through, retest, and then continue on the trend direction. So don't always think it's going to be exact, because it's not always going to be like that. So as I said, other things you can use are like steamroller, you can use RSI, you could use MACD, Bollinger Bands. A whole slew of indicators are going to help you identify whether these levels are bound to be broken or not. And use them to gauge, to gauge your trading ranges. Because if you can see there, that resistance level that we've got and that support level that we have here, that was a range that could have been traded for almost 2 months.
Yeah, absolutely.
If you were just purely trading on this. How long is that?
That's it's 2 months, 55 days. Yeah.
So using support and resistance is a pretty damn good way to simplify a trading strategy and then build upon that with other tools or indicators or strategies. So you could purely just use MACD or RSI and steamroller against resistance. You could sell at resistance. You could look to pick back up at support and really simplify your trading. You don't have to be in trades all the time. So, Ads, what are your thoughts on that? Are there any other takeaways that you would like to add to this before we wrap up this horizontal support resistance video?
It's very, very interesting that you mentioned, using something like RSI and or even steamroller to gauge the strength of a resistance or of a move when you're coming up to a resistance level. Taking this for an example here, where we came up to a known resistance level where we've been rejected multiple times, but this 4th time when we came up here, the indicators were still on their uptrend and nowhere near the top of the range. So a push through this was more likely to be expected when you're looking at your indicators for confluence, if we're going to break down once more or continue up. So yeah, that's really all I wanted to add to that, but explained beautifully, bro.
Excellent. So there you go. So that's a pretty brief introduction to horizontal support and resistance. Now, you might have also heard the same term being used for diagonal levels of support and resistance, which we'll get into in the next video. If you have any questions, of course, come over to the Discord. We are happy to answer them, and we will see you in video 2.